Hello, everyone. My name's Ishaan, and today I wanted to address the concept of agrivoltaics. Agrivoltaics pose a potential solution to a problem of land use and conversion for both agricultural practices and photovoltaics. Currently, many of the areas that are cognizant to photovoltaic use are also good for agriculture. This has created competing interests for energy creation and crop production. Agrivoltaics could be a sort of best of both worlds compromise to this problem, creating a system in which energy generation can be paired with crop production. So firstly, I wanted to quickly highlight the agenda or, blueprint for this presentation. First, I'll discuss what agrivoltaic systems are and highlight the presence of funding for these projects in recent years in the US. Then I'll discuss the two main types, inter-row and elevated systems, and compare and contrast them. Next, I'll talk about agrivoltaics power generation capabilities as well as efficiencies compared to some of their competing systems in agricultural landscapes. I then will discuss the economic side, including the levelized cost of electricity and what maintenance might entail for these systems. Lastly, I'll look at how crop production is impacted by the integration of solar panels on croplands before I conclude the presentation. So, firstly, what are agrivoltaics? Agrivoltaics pair solar power generation with agriculture, generating electricity while providing space for crops, grazing, and even pollinator and native habitats beneath or around the solar panels. They are dual use areas which carefully integrate solar energy generation and agricultural practice into the same plot of land. Agrivoltaics have been posed as a potential solution to land use conflicts between agricultural areas that are subject to pressure for solar development. Since solar sites often require similar conditions to agriculture, there are concerns that as solar power continues to expand, agricultural areas will have less room for expansion to meet the needs of a growing population. Agrivoltaics combine agricultural practices for specific crops and livestock with this solar generation, significantly improving water and land use efficiency. In some modeling studies, when paired with the right crops, agrivoltaics have the potential to increase land productivity between 35 and 73% by hectare. So I thought it was important to discuss funding for agrivoltaics in the US and their recent expansion in order to highlight that this is still a growing industry that's in its preliminary stages. So the US Department of Agriculture and the US Department of Energy have both funded research on agrivoltaics in recent years. The DOE's Solar Energy Technologies Office provided $130 million for solar projects and $7 million of which funded four agrivoltaic projects. In 2021, USDA also funded university research opportunities, highlighted by a $10 million investment into the evaluation of solar installation design across a diverse set of crops. As you can see in the diagram, over the last few years, the funding for agrivoltaic systems has risen, but I think it's important to note that only a small proportion of the total solar fund allocation is going towards agrivoltaics at this time. So it's still a bit preliminary in nature when it comes to the US. Next, I wanted to talk about the two basic agrivoltaic systems, which are inter-row and elevated agrivoltaic systems. Elevated agrivoltaics are like the ones you see in the middle of this diagram, such as for animal husbandry and the one below it, in which the panels are elevated above livestock or crops. Inter-row agrivoltaics are like the one in the bottom left, interspersed between crop rows, providing ample space for crops as well as more sunlight than elevated counterparts. So now we'll look at these two types in more detail. Let's first look at inter-row agrivoltaics. So inter-row systems provide more direct sunlight for crops compared to their elevated counterparts. Rows of panels are spaced out widely so that there's room for vegetation cultivation as well as livestock grazing. And These systems typically generate less energy per panel than their elevated counterparts, primarily due to being lower to the ground and as a result more susceptible to shade and less sunlight exposure in general. However, construction costs are much cheaper, and so inter-row systems are much more scalable for larger product projects. Some common crops include, grasses, grains, hardy vegetables such as broccoli, and two specific panel types are typically used. Um, the first type are single axis trackers, as can be seen in this bottom right image. These panels are placed on an axis, that is this pole here, in the middle of the image, and the panels move or track the sun's movements, moving sideways, like throughout the day to follow the sun and maximize, sunlight exposure. Vertical bifacial mounts are also used in these inter-row settings. This is represented by the picture in the top, in which the panels are fixed, facing east and west with panels on both sides, in order to maximize light capture in the mornings in the east and in the evenings in the west. Moving on to elevated agrivoltaics. So elevated systems place solar panels directly above vegetation, usually about 6 feet. As you can see in these diagrams here, they can be used to protect crops from overexposure to the sun and heavy rains, but typically are better for shade-tolerant crops like berries, grapes, and apples. Additionally, these systems typically have higher energy generation rates, as I mentioned, due to being higher off the ground with more exposure to direct sunlight and more avoidance of shaded conditions. However, because of this elevated nature, construction is much more complicated than inter-row systems, and as a result, these projects are much more expensive. Therefore, elevated systems are typically better for smaller projects of under 20 megawatts. Another important trade-off to note is that there is some land use impact as a result of these panels being um, more difficult to access in terms of the crops that may grow under them, or for the livestock to use the areas below them. As you can see in this bottom picture, the cattle seem pretty cramped under the elevated system. So now I just want to briefly, compare and contrast the two, right? So which is better? So I created a little summary table here in order to simply compare the two types. So elevated obviously wins in terms of electricity generation per panel. However, they're much more expensive, so tough to create on a larger scale. And also, because of this shading, there's a potential decrease in crop production when it comes to elevated systems. Inter-row agrivoltaics, however, generate less electricity per panel, but are much cheaper and scalable and more suited for providing the sunlight to crops. And as a result, I think at the moment, inter-row panels are likely more realistic for large-scale agrivoltaics projects because of the scalability as well as the crop benefit. I do want to say, though, that I do see a future in which these elevated systems become more scalable, and as they generate more energy per panel. They, show good promise if there's a way to decrease this construction cost and prioritize shade tolerant crops when using them. So moving on to power generation efficiency, like how well do these agrivoltaic systems work in actually generating power? And so to answer this question, um, I found this study in India. So at the moment, the typical approach to solar panels in agricultural settings is split approaches in which some of the land is used for solar generation and other parts of the land are used for agriculture. So there's not really an integration of the two very commonly. So a study in India compared this agrivoltaic integrated approach to these more traditional split solar agricultural systems. So as you can see in the table that I created, they found that integrated agrivoltaic systems had a normalized daily average power output of 59.88 watts and an efficiency of 16.89%, which outperformed the two competitive split techniques of bifacial, which had 56.35 watts and 14.545% efficiency, and monofacial, which had 47.18 watts created daily and 12.49% efficiency. This shows that combining or integrating agriculture with solar together is a viable solution for power generation and efficiency as well. So now that we know that, power generation is viable in these integrated agrivoltaics, I thought it was important to look at uh, installation and operational costs of these projects through the lens of levelized cost of electricity, which we discussed in class, for these agrivoltaics projects, and just briefly to look at how it compares to other solar types as well. So looking at levelized cost of electricity, just a reminder, LCOE is a financial metric used to compare the cost of different electricity generation technologies. It represents the average total cost of building and operating a power plant over its lifespan divided by the total amount of electricity it's expected to generate. In simpler terms, it's the minimum price at which electricity must be sold to break even on all costs. So looking at the diagram on the right, we can see that photovoltaics rank among the best in terms of levelized costs, with fixed axis photovoltaics having a levelized cost of electricity of $45 per megawatt hour, and tracking photovoltaics having a levelized cost of electricity of $40 per megawatt hour. So studies have shown that in developing countries with ideal conditions, agrivoltaics can have low LCOEs as well. So according to the study in India that I previously mentioned, agrivoltaics specifically are known to have a low levelized cost of electricity of $39 per megawatt hour, which means that relatively low capital and operational costs are required to maintain the systems. I think it's important because, as you can see in the diagram, this puts agrivoltaic systems in line with the best PV systems in terms of cost efficiency. Additionally, I thought it was important to note that compared to the split techniques that were compared to the agrivoltaic systems in the Indian study, as you can see in the table below, agrivoltaics outperformed the split systems in terms of levelized cost. So moving on to maintenance and cost, maintenance comparison. Agrivoltaics had a greater mean time between failure found in this India study. Um, so they outcompeted their split monofacial and bifacial systems with a MTBF of 40.21 years compared to 32.31 for monofacial and 31.81 for bifacial systems, respectively. It is important to note, though, that maintenance can be a challenge with these agrivoltaic systems and solar panels in general. A study found that dust deposition, bird droppings, and extreme weather events can dramatically impact the efficiency of photovoltaics, with studies finding reductions ranging from 2% to 50%, depending on climatic conditions and cleaning frequency, especially in agricultural landscapes when there's going to be a lot of dust deposits and a lot of wind, typically. It's important that these panels are maintained and cleaned pretty frequently in order to maximize their efficiency. As you can see in the picture in the bottom right, these solar panels can definitely get pretty dirty, and that can have a pretty significant impact on their ability to create energy and electricity. So up to this point, I think we've proven that these agrivoltaic systems have potential from an energy generation standpoint, as well as from a cost benefit standpoint. But lastly, I want to talk about the million-dollar question. How do these integrated systems impact crop production as well as productivity in these agricultural landscapes? So firstly, I found a Japan study which used dummy solar panel systems with wooden boards as a mimic for an agricultural system to see how elevated agrivoltaics might impact rice paddy production. You can see the dummy systems they used in the picture on the right. So agrivoltaics can have impacts on crop yields that otherwise would not occur if the photovoltaics were not installed in the agricultural lands, primarily due to a decrease in light availability. This particular study in Japan found that agrivoltaics installed in rice field sustained at least 80% of rice yields. Though crop production did decrease in this case, an application of agrivoltaics to just a small portion of the land could still have a dramatic impact on Japan's energy generation capacity. The study found that if these systems were applied to just 28% of the rice field density in Japan, they could generate 284 million megawatt hours per year, which is approximately 29% of the total Japanese electricity demand based on the 2018 calculations. Another study in Germany found that crop yields decrease with agrivoltaic presence except under hot and dry weather conditions. Yield ranges for crops cultivated under agrivoltaics were -9 to -3% for winter wheat, -20 to +11% for potato, and -8 to -5% for grass clover. This study can be seen on the right side of the screen, having a reference or control in the left part of the picture, and an agrivoltaic system on the right in order to come to these conclusions. Potato and winter wheat yield were increased in a dry 2018 summer in Germany by 2.7 and 11% respectively. Although this highlights that crop yields will generally decrease as adverse weather conditions such as drought occur more due to climate change, it is possible that agrivoltaics could provide a little more shade and buffer to improve crop yields for specific crops such as potato under specific conditions. So now to conclude my presentation, as solar technologies continue to improve in efficiency, it's without a doubt that agrivoltaics provide a great solution to land use efficiency. But based on the findings of this project, agrivoltaics' impact on crop yields is crop and climate dependent. So to maximize both crop yields and energy productions, farmers and stakeholders must consider a variety of factors. For example, crops that are shade tolerant are likely well suited for elevated agrivoltaic systems that will provide less light but supply more electricity. In contrast, more light dependent and cultivation needy crops will likely be better paired with inter-row agrivoltaics, though these will likely result in lower energy efficiencies per panel. For larger projects, inter-row systems are likely more scalable because of these trade-offs. A mix of both elevated and inter-row agrivoltaics across a single agricultural landscape is common and should be prioritized to create environmental conditions that are ideal for a diverse set of crops. The Indian study also highlighted that agrivoltaics can have extremely low levelized costs of electricity and that solar panels in general are extremely viable in terms of LCOE. Additionally, their power generation and efficiency also outperform their split use counterparts. The biggest downside at the moment with agrivoltaics is that crop yields do seem to decrease. However, as doubts become more common with climate change, it's possible that agrivoltaics could actually benefit specific crops such as potatoes, as demonstrated by the Germany study. Overall, as agrivoltaics continue to improve into the future, I think they demonstrate a potential solution to the land use conflict between agriculture and increased solar energy generation. So thank you very much for listening, and here are my references.